August 1897. The air in the Congo Free State doesn't just hang, it presses down, a suffocating blanket of heat and unspoken dread. Inside the makeshift infirmary of the Boma River Mission, Elara Vance held her charcoal stick with the practiced stillness of a botanical illustrator. Her subject was not a rare orchid or an undiscovered insect. It was the hand of a 5-year-old boy named Kitanu, or rather, the place where his hand should have been. The stump was new enough that the scar tissue was still a raw, puckered wound. With meticulous, almost clinical precision, she rendered every detail. The slight swelling around the wrist, the way the skin was drawn tight over the severed bones of the metacarpals, the precise angle of the cut. This was not art for art's sake. This was evidence. This was an indictment. King Leopold II's agents, the uniformed men of the brutal, had promised a humanitarian mission across Europe, a noble civilizing endeavor to bring light to the so-called Dark Continent. The pamphlets in Brussels and London spoke of ending the Arab slave trade, of building schools and hospitals, of lifting a people into modernity. They showed smiling missionaries and orderly plantations, a utopia carved from the jungle by a benevolent king. But Elara's field notes, bound in simple leather and hidden beneath her floorboards, told a different story. They were a secret ledger of atrocity. Alongside her sketches of the local flora, the rubber vines, the mahogany trees, were anatomical studies of a different kind. She documented the keloid scars left by the sala, a whip of sun-dried hippopotamus hide that flayed skin from bone. She noted the prevalence of malnutrition, sketching the telltale signs of kwashiorkor in children, the distended bellies, the thinning hair. Her training in scientific illustration, intended for cataloging God's creation, was now being used to document man's damnation. She was not merely sketching suffering, she was quantifying it. Her notes contained dates, locations, and the names of the officers in charge of the district. She recorded the rubber quotas, impossible demands that, when unmet, were paid for in flesh. The severed hand of young Kitanu was not an act of random cruelty. It was a calculated tool of economic policy, a receipt for a failed harvest. His father had not collected enough latex. The boy's hand was taken as proof to the Belgian overseers that the punishment had been carried out, a grotesque form of accounting in Leopold's vast blood-soaked enterprise. This stark reality was a universal way from the narrative being spun in Europe. The 1885 Berlin Conference had granted Leopold personal sovereignty over this immense territory, an area 76 times the size of Belgium itself, on the condition that he improve the lives of the native inhabitants. He had masterfully sold his Congo Free State as a philanthropic project, a grand gesture of Christian charity. The world, eager for a hero, and even more eager for Africa's resources, had applauded. The newspapers celebrated him. Royal societies bestowed him with honors. His lobbyists worked tirelessly in the halls of power, ensuring that any whispers of wrongdoing were dismissed as the grumblings of rival colonial powers or the fabrications of disgruntled traders. The official reports that reached the Belgian parliament were sanitized, filled with statistics on infrastructure and exports, with no column for amputated limbs or depopulated villages. The system was designed to be impenetrable, a fortress of lies built on a foundation of public goodwill and deliberate ignorance. Elara's work was a direct assault on that fortress. Her drawings possessed a power that written words alone could not. A senator in Brussels could easily dismiss a written report as exaggeration. But a drawing, a precise, anatomically correct rendering of a child's mutilation, was harder to deny. It bypassed the intellect and struck at the conscience. It was a silent, screaming testimony. Yet her isolation was absolute. She was a woman, a missionary-teacher, a figure expected to provide comfort and catechism, not to conduct a forensic investigation into a king's crimes. Her own mission superiors, terrified of losing their charter and facing the wrath of the colonial administration, urged her to stop. "This is not our work, Elara," the head missionary had warned her, his voice a low, fearful whisper. "Our concern is for their souls, not their politics." But Elara saw no distinction. What good was saving a soul if the body it inhabited was being systematically destroyed for profit? Her art, born of quiet, dangerous observation, was a direct contradiction to the gilded reports flooding European capitals. It was a truth whispered in a room where an empire was shouting a lie. Who would believe the meticulous observations of a lone woman over the grand pronouncements of an empire? That stark drawing of a child's missing hand was just the beginning. It was the genesis of a project that consumed Elara Vance, a secret, methodical catalog of an unfolding genocide. She continued her quiet, dangerous work, filling dozens of sketchbooks and journals with the visual language of oppression. These were not the travelogues of a curious European. They were a systematic, almost scientific record of human rights abuses, predating formal international investigations by years. Her hidden sketchbooks became a taxonomy of terror. She created sections as a biologist would for species. One section was dedicated to she didn't just draw the scars. She drew the whip itself, noting its length, its thickness, the way its edges were sharpened to inflict maximum damage. Her accompanying notes, written in a small, precise script, detailed the standard punishment: 25 lashes for a minor infraction, 100 for failing to meet a rubber quota, a sentence that was often fatal. She interviewed survivors, using local translators she swore to secrecy, and recorded their accounts of the floggings, noting how the infection that followed was often as deadly as the beating itself. Another section was dedicated to the mutilations. It started with hands, the most common form of punishment, but it expanded. She drew feet, severed for the same reason. She sketched ears and noses, sliced off as a more minor, yet still terrifying form of corporal punishment. Her notes read like a coroner's report. Subject: male, approx. 30 years old. Cause of mutilation: failure to deliver 2 baskets of rubber. Instrument: machete, single clean stroke. She was creating a forensic archive. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a cold, calculated act of witnessing. She understood that, to be believed, her evidence had to be irrefutable. Stripped of the feminine sentimentality she knew her future detractors would accuse her of. She applied the principles of objectivity she learned in her botany classes, treating each atrocity as a specimen to be recorded, classified, and understood in its horrifying context. She documented the emaciated bodies of rubber workers, their ribs starkly visible, their muscles atrophied from starvation and overwork. She sketched the chains and yokes used to bind hostages, the women and children of a village, held captive until the men returned with their rubber quotas. This meticulous documentation inevitably brought her into conflict with the colonial administration. The district commissioner, a man named Dubois, was a portly, sweating Belgian who saw the Congo not as a land of people, but as a vast spreadsheet of potential profits. He visited the mission on a routine inspection and, through a local informant, heard whispers of Elara's unusual drawings. He demanded to see her work. Elara presented him with a carefully selected sketchbook, one filled with harmless drawings of village life and local plants. But Dubois was not fooled. He ransacked her small quarters, tearing through her belongings until he found one of the hidden journals. He flipped through the pages, his face a mask of contemptuous disbelief. He stopped at a drawing of 3 severed hands, laid out in a row, which a soldier had presented to his superior as proof of his diligence. Dubois slammed the book shut. "This is fantasy," he spat. "The natives have tribal wars. They do these things to each other. You are an overly sensitive female observer, seeing barbarity where there is only progress." He confiscated the book, dismissing her detailed notes and anatomical precision as unverified anecdotes and hysterical scribblings. The systemic gaslighting was suffocating. Her evidence, so clear and so damning, was being twisted before her eyes, recast as the product of a fragile, emotional woman's imagination. The confrontation was a turning point. Elara realized that her evidence would never see the light of day through official channels. The system was designed to silence her. From that day forward, she worked in even greater secrecy. She created multiple copies of her most important drawings and notes. She developed a code, using botanical terms to refer to different atrocities, and began smuggling pages out with trusted traders and missionaries returning to Europe. She knew she was creating an archive for a future she might not live to see. A future where someone would be willing to look at her work and see not hysteria, but truth. The core of Leopold's propaganda rested on the idea that the Congolese were savages, incapable of credible testimony. But Elara's drawings were a powerful counter-narrative. A drawing of a child's severed hand required no translation. It spoke a universal language of pain and injustice, directly challenging the dehumanizing rhetoric of the colonial regime. It was evidence that could, if seen by the right people, dismantle an empire of lies. But for now, it remained buried, a silent scream in the archives of a complicit world. How could such irrefutable visual testimony be so thoroughly sidelined for decades? Decades after Elara Vance's chilling observations were buried in mission archives and forgotten trunks, their true power would finally emerge, not with a thunderclap, but in the quiet, dusty silence of a university library. In the 1960s, a new generation of post-colonial historians, no longer content with the self-congratulatory narratives of the empires, began to dig deeper. One of them, a meticulous researcher named Dr. Aris Thorne, was sifting through a collection of papers bequeathed by a defunct missionary society in Antwerp. He was looking for economic data, for shipping manifests, for anything that could shed light on the true scale of the rubber trade. He came across a crate labeled Boma River Mission Sundries. Inside, beneath crumbling hymnals and faded letters, were Elara Vance's sketchbooks. Initially, he dismissed them as the quaint hobby of a missionary woman. But as he turned the pages, his academic detachment evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of horror and awe. He saw the clinical precision, the anatomical accuracy, the cold, factual notes in the margins. This was not the work of a hobbyist. This was the work of a witness. Her sketches, once deemed unscientific and hysterical, were about to become crucial forensic evidence in the trial of history. Thorne and his colleagues began the painstaking work of cross-referencing Elara's journals with the historical record that had since come to light. They laid her drawings alongside the text of the Casement Report, the landmark 1904 investigation by the British diplomat Roger Casement, which first officially exposed the horrors of the Congo. Where Casement's report described the practice of severing hands, Elara's sketchbook provided a detailed, dated visual record of that exact practice in a specific village. Her work became the visual appendix the Casement report never had. They compared her notes to the tireless campaigning of E.D. Morel, the shipping clerk who deduced the slave labor system from manifests and founded the Congo Reform Association. Morel had the numbers, the tons of rubber going out and the paltry value of goods going in, but Elara had the human cost, rendered in charcoal and ink. Her work provided the visceral, undeniable proof that gave life to their statistics and reports. Her anatomical precision was particularly vital. Colonial apologists had long claimed that the severing of hands was an indigenous practice, a form of tribal justice. But Elara's drawings, with their detailed notes on the clean machete-like cuts and their direct link to rubber quotas, systematically debunked this lie. She showed it for what it was, a tool of colonial terror, an instrument of economic policy. The impact was profound. Elara's rediscovered work helped solidify the historical condemnation of Leopold II's regime, shifting the narrative from one of abstract numbers, the estimate of 10 million dead, to one of tangible, individual human suffering. Her drawings began appearing in academic journals, in documentaries, in museums dedicated to human rights. They became a cornerstone of teaching the history of colonialism, not as a benign civilizing mission, but as a brutal system of extraction and violence. Her quiet, persistent act of witnessing finally found its audience, half a century late. Her work fueled the burgeoning international human rights discourse, serving as a powerful example of how art and observation can be used as tools for justice, as a form of resistance against state-sponsored lies. She had created a record so powerful that it survived its own burial. And yet, her own name remained a footnote, if it appeared at all. The credit still largely went to the great men, Casement, Morel, Mark Twain, who had championed the cause in the public sphere. The quiet, foundational work of the woman on the ground, the one who gathered the primary evidence at great personal risk, was once again overshadowed. Her story is a stark reminder of the systemic erasure of women's contributions to history, and of how the voices of those who provide the evidence are often drowned out by those who later publicize it. Her legacy is not just about the Congo. It is a testament to the power of a single, determined observer to hold a mirror up to a monstrous system. It challenges us to reconsider what constitutes evidence. Is it only the official report, the government statistic, the signed treaty? Or is it also the sketch in a hidden journal, the whispered testimony, the photograph that a regime tried to destroy? Elara Vance's story proves that the most powerful truths are often contained in the records that history tries to forget. Her sketches, once dismissed and hidden, now serve as an eternal testimony against Leopold's atrocities and a timeless inspiration for all who use their skills, whatever they may be, to document injustice. Yet her name remains largely absent from mainstream accounts. How many more crucial truths lie buried, waiting for an intrepid eye to resurrect them?